We do have time for one more question, and then we will go to closing remarks. So for this question, the federal government's on-book or cash basis debt, which excludes the present value obligation for benefits that have already been promised, now exceeds over $30 trillion, an amount in excess of $90,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. So if elected to Congress, will you put forward a balanced budget amendment? What would be the key provisions of your proposal, and what changes do you think the federal government should make in its budgeting process?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you run your own home family budget, do you ever allow for deficit budgeting? Do you allow for spending beyond your means? You do not. So this is what happens right now, because the government is in a position to have the apprentice presses running. They're doing it. This is unconscionable, and it's maybe even ruining our country. And we can see how it materializes via inflation. So I am all for having budgeting without any deficit spending at all. And yes, it is maybe very painful, but maybe we can take stepwise measures to make sure that we get where we started from. Not many years ago, we had almost like $10 trillion. Okay, that was 20 years ago. Now it's $30 trillion, and it's right now in every year. As Silva said, $3 trillion last year it was budgeted for deficit. That is not to be followed. We cannot accept it. We have to fight it in every way we can, because otherwise it's going to ruin our country. Inflation is going to be the one that actually we're going to feel, and we are feeling pain already at the gas pump, at your grocery stores. It is unthinkable. We cannot let it happen. Let's control it at its where it is. Let's stop printing presses, because that's how we create. Let's also revisit the idea of a Federal Reserve System, because we have a treasury. Maybe Treasury should be the one that is sufficient to do all the controls that we need to make sure that a dollar has its value. So there are a lot of ways we can approach it, but we have to be consistent, and we have to introduce the legislature to actually revisit some of the issue. And Federal Reserve System is definitely one of those that we should look at it, because that creates and inflates our ability, how we spend the money. Because almost on with will, governments decides how much they want for their own programs by having printed presses. So let's stop it at its tracks. Let's do it now. Let's make sure that the legislature is there in place to have balanced budgeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. So Stephanie, this question is about the federal government's debt. If Kathy is elected to Congress, will she put forward a balanced budget amendment? What would be key provisions of her proposal, and what changes does she recommend for the federal governing budgeting process?
Well, I'll answer the question short form first, and that is, I know for a fact that Kathy, especially as a mother of 6, knows how important it is to have a balanced budget. So she would take those same values directly to Washington as your senator. She would go in there and know that it's not just enough to have a balanced budget, but that when you're proposing bills and you're proposing spending and you're going through, you're also going through and you're finding ways to cut the pork. That's the other thing. One of the things that we know right now, that our biggest problem, which is inflation, is due in major part, although not solely, because energy independence, is in fact the spending that goes on in Washington. So in fact, that would be one of the topmost priorities that Kathy would bring, and that is common sense in how the government is spending our money. And it was interesting that you mentioned that the tax burden was $90,000. We've actually heard it, I've heard a higher number. We're all right now carrying, I think, closer to $140,000 tax burden. That means we have to pay that off for what the government is supposedly paying for us. So that is one of the things we need probably utmost right now at this point in time, is to send somebody to Congress, send Kathy Salvi to Congress, who knows that we cannot spend. We are not like giving the keys to the liquor cabinet to the teenagers, which is basically how the Democrats have been behaving with our money. What we need to do is get common sense people into Washington who know exactly what we need to be spending money on and not dream progressive policy wish lists. So Kathy would 100% wholeheartedly, if not herself sponsor, endorse every bill that goes to reducing this spending and budget.
Thank you.